And now to John Smith, who is here, who is the John Smith, the renowned maker of films, whose work we've been showing. And we know that we're joining a very long list of international venues at which you have exhibited and talked about your work, and we're really honoured that you're here and that you took the extra long journey to Helston yesterday through hideous weather and various kind of train loops to come. So now, we've been enjoying this programme of 8 short films that spans nearly 4 decades, from The Girl Chewing Gum, made in 1976 when you were in your mid-20s, to a film made this year during lockdown, twice. And so we've had a chronological sampling from a very large catalogue of work. And it's allowed us to see some of the underlying principles behind your work and some of its constantly inventive diversity. You came on the scene in the early 70s when progressive artists were vigorously questioning the underlying illusions upon which film and photography had been based, and you participated in a vital restructuring of time-based media. Could I have you start by telling us about the debates in which you participated when you were a member of the London Filmmakers Co-op and the concerns that you and your contemporaries were addressing at that time?
Yeah. Well, I started making films at the time when there weren't so many artist filmmakers around like there are now, and most of them, certainly in London, were based around the London Filmmakers Co-op. And there was quite a strong ideological bent to discussion at the time, both at the Co-op and also prior to that at the Royal College of Art, where I'd been a student, where somebody may know of the work of Teresa Gleadowe, was a tutor at the Royal College of was my tutor at the Royal College of Art, who was definitely very influential on me. But at that time, artists and independent filmmakers, really of a more conventional bent, independent filmmakers, were making work which actually sought to draw attention to the illusion of cinema. So many people were making work which had the opposite ambition to mainstream cinema. As we know, mainstream cinema wants us to forget that we're watching a film, and and work at that time for a lot of people was very focused on actually wanting to remind you that we're watching a film. So my film, The Girl Chewing Gum, of course, which was made at that time, was made within that kind of context. My first ambition in making the film was to draw attention to the illusion of cinema by denying the existence of cinema and treating what you see on the screen as an absolute reality. That's one reason that film, unlike most of my films, was shot in black and white, because I wanted to really draw attention to the fact that we forget we're looking at a black and white film almost immediately. The illusion of cinema is so strong, which is why halfway through the film I refer to a red Jaguar. I said, well, now I want the red Jaguar to come across the frame to remind you of something that you forgot 3 seconds into the film, which was, so that was really the idea behind that work. Also treating that 4:3 rectangle as if that's the world, that's the absolute reality in its own right, where one can, within fractions of a second, summon something to happen, to come in from the left or right of the frame or whatever, or even to ask the world to move towards you or go away from you, or ask the world to move to the left or move to the right. So that was kind of my way of actually dealing with those ideas at the time, because to be honest, I found a lot of the work that was going on at the time, although I very much wanted to be part of that group and part of that group of people who were making work that had those concerns. Personally, I found a lot of it rather too dry, and I was interested in making work which, and still am interested in making work which was more accessible to an audience who hadn't necessarily seen certain films or read certain books or seen other artwork. So you probably notice from my work that I have very rarely any references to anything other than the world. You don't need to have experienced anything other than walking down the street, hopefully, to actually get something from the film. So that was a very deliberate thing. I think it was partly because most of my friends at that time, apart from my friends at college, all my other friends, very few of them went into higher education. And I wanted to make work that shows people would actually get. You know, most of my friends didn't go to art school, didn't go and see experimental or artist film, and but that sort of stuck with me. I mean, I definitely don't want to make work for elites. You know, I mean, it's very important to me.
And was the fact that your work was engaging and attractive to a wider audience, was that a problem for you as well, with amongst the kind of the...
It wasn't as much of a, I mean, look, people often ask me that question. It wasn't as much of a problem as one might think, because actually when people talk about, and maybe I'm reinforcing a stereotype here from what I just said, but there was a kind of diversity of work, people working in different ways. I mean, so there were a few other artists at that time working with film, like Ian Breakwell and Jeff Keane, for example, who both had an element of humour in their work and certainly an element of narrative in their work. But they were kind of outsiders really to that group as well. But I certainly felt that my work wasn't taken quite as seriously as I'd like it to have been, because it had this humour, had a humour to it, you know. I mean, for me, The Girl Chewing Gum is a very serious film about the power of language to control how we see the world, you know. I mean, it uses humour, but humour in a way is a kind of byproduct of the ideas that I'm trying to deal with, and the humour very often in my work comes out of an exploration of ambiguity. And we do always find things funny if we know something is one thing and we're told it's something else. And of course, language is such a powerful phenomenon. It's easy for us to imagine the lie that we're being told. So, and that makes us laugh very often, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, The Girl Chewing Gum, certainly, I think, you know, people didn't really think that much of it when I made it. But I thought it was pretty good, so I kept showing it. And after a couple of years, it kind of it caught on. So it's my own fault, really, that a film I made when I was 23 is probably my best known work still, because I could have actually avoided that curse by just throwing it in the bin, you know, and not showing it anymore.
Of course, something else has happened to it since, which is that history has piled in after
Absolutely,
it.
absolutely.
So that when we watch it now, we're watching something that has a very different meaning from
Absolutely,
the film
absolutely.
that you made. How do you feel about the way your work accrues history in that?
I'm completely fascinated by it, actually, to be honest, because actually things take on such an entirely different significance. And The Girl Chewing Gum, you know, which is shot in Dalston in East London, which probably people know is a kind of very kind of gentrified part of London now, is entirely just, you wouldn't recognise it at all as a place, not least because every architectural feature that you see in the film has either been demolished or changed its function. The Steele's, the glass merchants, is now a scooter shop, motor scooter shop, and the cinema was demolished shortly after I made the film, as I said a little earlier. But what's interesting to me was that I chose that location as the most mundane and ordinary place that I could find. It was very important to me that I kind of took something which was so ordinary and hopefully made it extraordinary through the making of the film. And I chose the location. I did choose the location for the clock and for the cinema, because it was a film about cinema. I thought I want to show a cinema in the film. And I chose and it was great. They had the clock, so I can direct the hands of the clock to move at a certain speed, and then, you know, that's a good way of actually, yeah. But it's a good way of showing people that, you know, because some people think that things are directed. You know, still now I'll show the film and say, I showed it to a group of not very bright students, I have to say, a while ago, and one of them said to me, he said, "How did you get all those people to do that stuff, you know?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't." I said they were non-actors, and he said, "Really? They were non-actors as well? They were brilliant, weren't they?" So, But that's really interesting. And of course, when I made that film, it never occurred to me I'd be showing it 44 years after I made it still, you know. Yeah. And but it now becomes like a historical. It's a
document.
historical
Yeah.
document of Hackney in the 1970s. You know, and I think actually it's probably the only 10-minute shot of that part of London shot at that time. They remind me of those Mitchell and Kenyon films, you know, that they discovered, which are you know, just what's going on in the street.
Yeah.
Turn the sound down, and it's that document.
Yeah.
But the funny thing for me is that film often gets shown in an educational context, not just in art schools, but also sometimes in schools, secondary schools, and kind of very often in relation to documentary. And occasionally, when I've been kind of ego searching for myself online, I find some blog that a school student has written about the film, and I found some lovely things that somebody once said, oh, it was made before colour film was invented. And someone else said it was made before they knew how to edit. There's only 2 shots in the film, you know. And, you know, I sort of laugh at that, but then I think, well, actually, you know, for a 16-year-old in 2020, you know, 1976 is, you know, it's more or less the same as 1895 when cinema was invented. You know, it's like ancient history, and it looks like ancient history. So it's an interesting thing. I did make a remake of a film called The Man Phoning Mum, in exactly the same location, where I kind of attempted to replicate the camera movements and superimposed one image over the other in 2011. And that was a really interesting thing, just seeing the way in which people negotiate the street in 1976 and in 2011, because in 2011 most people are on the phone or got headphones, you know, and so that's why I called it The Man Phoning Mum. Almost everybody is mentally in another place as well as the one they're physically in, and it sort of shows. It shows us.
But people aren't too bothered by a cameraman in the street.
Mm-hmm.
They continue on their...
That's right. That's right. And I think at that time, and it was a big camera at that time. It was a big Arriflex, you know, camera this big on a big tripod. I deliberately set the camera up in a place where, because at the time, well, it's still the same. The law, I think, is still the same. That if you set up a camera in the street on a tripod, you're supposed to get police permission because you're creating an obstruction. Although very few people do that. So I deliberately did set up the camera in a very, very prominent place because I wanted the police to stop me filming, and that would have been the end of the film. So I was hoping that I might, you know, command the police to come and tell me to switch the camera off, but of course they never turned up. But it was interesting, I think, in terms of at that time, like if you were there with, you know, like a big camera and things like that, and you're doing this, people were kind of, most people was kind of think, oh, this is, you know, these are. You would say you were taken as being some kind of authority, that you know that sort of, oh yeah, they're kind of, you know, mustn't, you know, and it's kind of the opposite now. And I shot The Man Phoning Mum. Somebody walked in front of the camera, and then they came back. I wasn't filming at the time, but well, actually I was filming at the time, but I didn't use that shot. But they walked in front of the, and then they turned around and came back, and he came straight up to me and said, "You fucking filming me?" You know, and it was like, it was really aggressive, you know, and it's like, and I don't know whether the guy sort of deliberately walked in front of the camera because he thought, well, maybe he'll give me some money, you know, but certainly at that time, we didn't need to worry about release forms and things like that, because the only people who really acknowledge the camera are children. And you know, you see kids coming by like this, and another one goes like this, you know, but nobody else does. And people are sort of, you know, I think it's a bit indicative. It was like a working class part of London, you know. I think it's a bit indicative of people kind of thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to, you know, interfere with these people doing their stuff. You know, you've got to doff your hat and.
Can you go back a little bit and just tell us about your kind of entry into the world of being an artist?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to. I was originally interested in chemistry when I was at school, and my parents got very disappointed when I got halfway through senior school and moved from being interested in chemistry to being interested in art. And but what they really didn't know was the reason I was interested in chemistry was I was interested in making explosives. And at that time, it was possible to go and buy the most lethal chemicals from a shop in Stoke Newington called A.N. Beck and Sons. I remember it very well, where you could go and buy phosphorus, potassium, sodium, concentrated sulfuric acid, all of these things. And I was telling Teresa earlier, if you were under 16, you weren't allowed to buy these things unless you had a note from your parents. So I used to get my dad to write me a note saying, please give John a bottle of concentrated sulfuric acid. It was extraordinary, because nobody could buy any of these chemicals now. But anyway, I digress a bit. I was really into bomb making, and in a way, I think in a way, making bombs and doing practical chemical experiments is a bit like making films. It's a bit like editing. You're putting these ingredients together, and you're creating a compound, from putting different elements together, and hopefully that creates a reaction, a chemical or otherwise. But I wanted to go to art school. I started painting. This is sort of the late 60s. I started painting like terrible psychedelic paintings, and it was a kind of fashionable thing to do, to go to art school. I think partly I wanted to go to art school because that's what people did, and it seemed quite good. I went to a boys' school, and there were girls went to art school as well, which was another thing that made it appealing. But my parents didn't want me to go. They wanted me to go to university. But eventually, I got thrown out of school at the end of the first year, sixth, for having long hair, believe it or not. and so at that point, my parents really sort of gave in and said, "Okay, we'll let you go to art school." But they wouldn't let me do fine art, which was just as well. When I look at my paintings from the time, I think I probably wouldn't have gone very far. They said, "We want you to do commercial art," as they called it, graphic design. Because maybe you'll get a job and things like that. And because I was only 17, I couldn't get a grant, so I had to do what my parents said for a year. So I went and did a foundation course, and then initially a graphic design course. But the graphic design course at Hornsey College of Art was it was like a vocational course, and we spent all the time kind of drawing typefaces and things like this. And so after a year, I'd had enough, and then at the North East London Polytechnic, where I'd done my, Walthamstow Art School it was called at the time, where I'd done my foundation, started a new course called Communication Design, which was the first of its kind in the country, and a lot of other courses like that emerged later. But it was a mixed media course that involved graphics, but also film, video, photography, sound, creative writing. So it was a very broad course, set up by people who'd been thrown out of Hornsey after the sit-in in 1968. So it was run by people who were, the head of course was certainly Marxist. There were lots of Chilean people on the course who were escaping from Chile, who he gave places to, in order so they could come and stay in the country. So there were interesting, quite a few refugees actually over the time I was there for different courses ended up on this course.
And what about the economy of making work? How did you set up? I mean, how did you start to make films, and what was needed financially in order to make them? And what means did you need?
Well, when I was at North East London Poly, as I said, it was a new course, and the staff on the course weren't familiar with people making films before or using film laboratories, and we were allowed initially to send our work to a laboratory called Filmatic in Notting Hill Gate to get our 16mm films processed, and until at a certain point somebody noticed the bills that were coming in. And I've still got a letter somewhere which I don't know if people know, another artist filmmaker called Liz Rhodes. Liz and I were both students on this course, and Liz, myself, and another filmmaker called Tim Bruce, we all used this laboratory and really ran up an enormous bill here, and somehow we were allowed to, just order stuff, and I've still got this letter which I found not quite recently. It's from the head of school saying, sort of reprimanding us that we spent the whole college budget for a term on our laboratory bill. So that was so filmmaking was, you know, an expensive process, and yeah, yeah, and if you I mean, I didn't really use the filmmakers co-op where you could actually develop your own work and things like that, but I was more interested in work which on the surface had a more kind of mainstream look to it, although it was undermining hopefully mainstream cinema, but I didn't want it to kind of immediately look as though it wasn't mainstream cinema. So I used film laboratories and you know, got funded throughout being at art school, and then after leaving art school, then in those days, as I said, there weren't so many people working with artists working with film, and so for quite a few years, well, nearly 20 years actually, my work was more or less funded by the Artist Film Committee at the Arts Council, which one could apply to once a year. I remember it was in November. You could apply for a grant. It was just once a year. So every October, I'd start thinking, I better have an idea, you know, kind of try and get some funding for work. And but
was it pretty much one film a year, just steadily?
Not. It sort of was very, very variable. I mean, they were very. It was a very different time in that. There wasn't a kind of, you didn't have to sign a contract saying you'd produce something within a year or by any kind of date. I mean, one or two of my films, I mean, The Black Tower that I showed here, was made over 4 years. And, you know, I got the funding for that at a certain point. I think maybe I got some completion funding later on. But there weren't those sorts of demands, or if there were, you didn't really have to take all that much notice of them, you know. Which was very important to me because I tend to work sometimes very slowly on things, and that was an important thing.
But apart from the material needs, I mean, film stock and processing, what else did you need to make it work?
Well, I've always been really interested in trying to make work which doesn't actually cost too much, actually, and you know, a lot of my work was just the cost of film stock and processing, which, you know, could add up to quite a lot, but I generally had kind of quite a small, you know, shooting ratio and things like that. So the budgets weren't enormous. I think it's partly also to do with teaching in art school and wanting to kind of set a bit of an example to students and show that you don't need to have enormous resources to make work. The most important thing is to have ideas and hopefully you know, sort of realise them quite economically.
And they never involved others other than passers-by, as in?
Very, very, very rarely. I mean, of the films that I've shown here, I think Gargantuan, of course, I appear in. So I got that was a friend of mine who I'd been at the Royal College with, who filmed that, who ended up working as a director of photography and. The newt, sorry. I didn't have to pay the newt, but the newt was. I mean, that was about one of my most ambitious works, actually. Having to collaborate with the newt, because I normally work on my own, and I had lots of problems with the newts. I have to say.
The newt wouldn't sit there.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't keep still. I actually, to begin with, I anticipated I might have problems, and I didn't really know what the newt would look, how it would behave, you know, in front of the camera, and whether it might get camera shy or anything like that. So I got I just got it stoned. I got two kinds of newts. I got the alpine newt, which is the one that figures in the film. This one here, which is only, you know, this big. And another one, I can't remember, it's much less photogenic. So I decided quite quickly I was going to work with the alpine newts. And I had two of them because I thought I better have a stand-in case one of them, you know, kind of gets cross and things. And so I had real problems setting it up, because what happens was that the newt basically wouldn't keep still on the pillow, and the camera starts off zoomed in on a frame about literally an inch and a half wide, so there's no depth of field whatsoever. So the newt had to keep still, or it'd be completely out of focus. So I don't know how I found him, but somehow I found a newt expert and I got this guy's number. I got this guy's number and I phoned him up and I said, I've got this problem with the newt, it won't keep still. And he said, it's really simple. He said, just put it in the fridge for a few hours. I said, well, is it? That's a bit cruel, isn't it? He said, no, don't worry. As long as you don't freeze it, as long as it's above freezing point. Newts hibernate. It'll just go into it'll think it's hibernating, and it will go into kind of suspended animation, and it will behave really well. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. Make sure the fridge isn't freezing point. So I put the newt in the fridge, got it out, put it on the pillow. And the problem was, it had really gone into hibernation, and it looked dead. It wasn't dead, but it wasn't. You couldn't see it breathing. The one in the film, it's kind of, you can see it. but you couldn't. So I thought, well, that's no good. The newt looks dead. So I phoned the guy up again, and I said, there's a problem. I've got a problem. Thanks for the advice. It worked, but the newt looks dead. Have you got any other alternative? And I just explained the situation. He said, I tell you what, put it in position and then put a teacup over it so it's in the dark, right? And leave the teacup over it for a minute or so. And then when you take the cup off of it, it will be kind of stunned by the light. You're filming under bright lights and things. And it will take a little while to orientate itself. And with a bit of luck, it will keep still. So I thought, okay, that sounds all right. And I did it. And actually, that worked like a dream. The trouble was that actually filming the shot was really tricky because it's this macro zoom over a long period of time. The zoom had to be smooth. I had to sing to my unsatisfaction, so we had to do quite a few takes, and the first few takes were fine. And then by the time it got to the fourth take, then the newt saying, I know, I'm under a teacup, kind of. So it didn't work anymore. But fortunately, I had the second newt. So I got the second newt in, and we got it right. But it was a real palaver. It really was, I have to say. So I haven't made many more animal films since then.
Never work with dogs and children.
That's what they say. My cat appears in several of my films, and he behaved quite well. He's quite photogenic. He's in the Black Tower, actually. He runs across the road and looks up at the camera, and the cars are crossing the sky.
He's not being instructed to do so by the director.
No, it was his own. He was a bit of a show off. Like to get on camera.
Sticking with the newt for a moment, where did that start? Did it start with the pun? Did it start with my newt?
Well, it's interesting that I've been talking today with students about kind of limitations and how I find it really interesting. To me, it's really helpful to work with some kind of limitations, whether they're self-imposed or they come from outside, because in making film work, there's so many things that you can do, and it's kind of so it's really nice actually if either to impose a limitation on yourself or to get a brief for something. And the 1 minute film, the Gargantuan, was commissioned by BBC and the Arts Council when they used to have this arts magazine programme, some of you may remember, called The Late Show, and that was it makes me amazed now when I think of it, but every night of the week there was this half-hour arts magazine programme on BBC Two, albeit fairly late at probably 10:30 or something, I don't know. But anyway, for several years they commissioned artists to make a 1 minute film to be an intervention in this magazine programme, and so the brief was you any subject you like, but it has to be 1 minute. And as a kind of lover of bad puns, I kind of thought, okay, minute, 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 and started to realise that there was a kind of triple pun there that one could play with. So the film is actually exactly 1 minute long. To the time when the alarm rings, actually exactly 1 minute to the frame after the first frame of the film, which of course nobody would know, but it satisfies me to know that that's the duration, which is one of the reasons I had to do it several times to get the timing right.
But in general, your films feature your voice, so quite often your face.
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, twice.
Yeah. No, I'm in a fair number. I'm probably in about 8 8 or so of my films, certainly.
Do you
I
think
pop
there's
up.
some kind of unreliable autobiography going on as well? Because there's an unreliable narrator at work.
I don't know. I mean, I sort of don't ask that question of myself, actually. But sometimes people sort of say to me, so who is that? Who is the John Smith in your film? You know, and I can't answer that question. You know, I really don't know. I just sort of seem to end up making this work that I'm in, you know.
And you're part of the immediately available material.
That
can be used.
I mean, I do have an attraction towards doing kind of confessional stuff. So there's quite a lot of the videos I do say kind of quite embarrassing things in the autobiographical things, you know. And so I kind of there's some kind of some kind of impulse about it. I probably need therapy, you know. I don't know.
You probably don't.
But maybe I don't because of that. Yeah. It's cheaper. Coming out to economy. Yeah, don't have to pay anybody else to do it. But yeah, what was I going to say? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I try to. The thing with my own voice is, I mean, you might have noticed in the credits of The Black Tower, unlike most of my films, which don't have any credits for anybody, it thanks about 8 people, I think. And 4 of those people are people that I auditioned to do the voiceover, that I ended up doing myself, but I really desperately wanted to use somebody else's voice for the voiceover. But whenever I did it, and this is probably a strange thing to say, but I found that the voices that people used had too much character. That I could place them, you know, societally quite easily. And I started off originally. I thought I wanted to make it because it was like a pastiche of a horror story. I used a kind of professional actor, a guy called John Abineri, who was a well-established film and TV actor. He's actually the guy in the early Ferrero Rocher adverts at the Ambassador's Party. But before that, he had a much more distinguished career in the Adventures of Robin Hood, on the TV version of Robin Hood and things like that. But he was in Hawkeye. Hawkeye and the Last of the Mohicans. He was in, anyway, I digress. But anyway, I used this guy, and then I thought, no, he's too. I thought I wanted to stereotype, but I don't want to stereotype. It's too much, you know. It's too much. I want the words to work. And then I used a guy called Michael Mazière, who has a kind of French Cockney voice, and I thought that would be a good voice. It'd be hard. That would be a kind of interesting, difficult voice to place. So I tried him, and I liked his voice, but he wasn't used to performing, and he wasn't a very good performer, to be honest. Although his voice was very good. And then I thought, no, I want a very ordinary kind of just an ordinary London voice. And then I used some people might go Gary Stevens, a performance artist. And Gary, I thought Gary would be good, but then Gary made everything sound so funny that I couldn't use that either. I ended up using my own voice, and the reason that I used it and have used it ever since is that it's a silly one, but to me, my voice has no character whatsoever because I know my own voice. So what I want is I want the words to do the work. I want you to imagine. To keep things as open as possible and imagining who the character is and things like that. And although, you know, people probably do ascribe a character to a voice like mine, I don't hear it because it's my voice, you know. So to me, I've got the most neutral voice in the world. So I kind of, that's the reason for being for the John Smith voice.
I mean, to you, it has a quality of ordinariness, which is one of the
absolutely, which is exactly what I want.
Pursuing in a rather
yeah. And I do have quite a deadpan voice, you know. Kind of certainly when it's a deliberately deadpan voice, and I have a bit more animated in situations like this. But
I'm looking around for anybody who wants to ask a question. So please tell me if you do. otherwise we'll go on. Perhaps you can talk about On, which happens to be on the screen.
Nah.
And we may or may not have been on air when we were talking about it before. Difficult to tell. Could you tell us a little bit about how, because this does involve somebody other than yourself?
Shall I talk about what I was talking about earlier?
Yeah,
The sort of same, to repeat it for the online situation.
Maybe
Okay, right. So actually, On was made for a particular context. It was actually for the 25th anniversary of the London Filmmakers Co-op in 1986, I believe, and they asked people involved in the co-op to make a 100-foot film of like it's actually literally it's 2 minutes 45 seconds, and Om's a bit longer, but they weren't too strict about it. So I kind of made it for that context, but that's not particularly relevant. But I wanted to make something which, you know, explored ambiguity in every aspect of what you're looking at. So to me, that's a kind of, I show that film a lot. Hopefully, it's a kind of distillation of the ideas that are present in a lot of the films, in that everything that you see and hear at the beginning of the film turns out to be presented as something. It leads you astray. So not only does what appears to be a Buddhist monk at the beginning end up being revealed as a skinhead, and what looks like incense smoke ends up being the smoke from a cigarette, but also in the soundtrack, what starts off sounding like a voice ends up maybe sounding like the sound of the razor, although it is the voice all the way through. But the image hopefully determines, that makes you think of the sound representing something else. So that was quite a distillation of ideas. But the character in the film, I mean, I couldn't do it myself because I didn't want to have a shaved head, apart from anything else. And I was eager to have somebody else in my work. It wasn't me. So the character in the film was the only person that I sort of knew, I vaguely knew, who had who actually shaved his head. And there's a guy called I don't know. He's never come after me for royalties. I remember his name. There's a guy called John Harding, who lived. I used to see in the local pub, and he was a friend of some of my students. And I asked him if he would be in this film and he'd mind having his head shaved. That was a nice thing about that film. As with Girl Chewing Gum, where I just had one roll of film and I had to work with whatever happened within that period of time. Of course, if you're filming somebody having their head shaved, you've only got one go at it, and you know, if it doesn't work, you've got to wait a couple of weeks at least before you can redo it. So I was anxious that he would be able to do things properly. And anyway, he turned up at my house to film it, and at that time I was still working on 16mm film, and I think he didn't know me that well. He wasn't all that familiar with the procedure, and so he was quite shocked to come into my house and see like a big film camera set up and lights and sound equipment and things like that. And he was very, very nervous. And so we did a run through, and I said to him, you know, you have to keep completely still, and you know, just look as though you're chanting Om, and you know, it takes about 3 minutes, and your head's going to be shaved after 1.5 minutes in. And anyway, he was very nervous, and he just couldn't keep still, and you know, started twitching. And but I happened to know that he that he really liked smoking dope, and so I rolled him a very big spliff with lots and lots of dope in it, and he smoked it and became completely stoned. And as people who see the film realise, you can see he just keeps absolutely still for this period of time. So there is a kind of crossover with the newt, really. Except I drugged him, and I stunned the newt in a different way. But
Can I ask, also perhaps leads into thinking about the relationship between humour and politics. Because, I mean, could be seen as an exemplary piece of kind of political exposition about
assumptions that we make. It's also
Yeah.
an exemplary piece of taking apart cinematic conventions. I mean, it operates on both those levels.
Yeah, yeah.
And it does so using humour as one of its mechanisms.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you think that you consciously, and you've done the same twice actually, the film in which we're instructed to wash our hands twice,
Yeah, yeah.
you do was seen this much and introducing Prime Minister's instructions. Do you think are you conscious that when you're dealing with very serious subjects, you're more likely to need to use humour?
Yeah, absolutely. I think humour very often is a way of making serious subjects more hard-hitting, actually, and I think, but also maybe sometimes to kind of sort of lead people into something that they might not be all that interested in without being kind of guided. And but very often, I mean, for example, it was the kind of the formal idea that came first. But then, having had that formal idea, I started to think, well, actually, this is really, this is serious stuff. We shouldn't judge people by appearances. All of those things, but it's interesting. That film gets interpreted in many different ways. Yeah, yeah. It's been shown in Germany quite a lot. There's a distributor in Germany, in Hamburg, short film agency in Hamburg, and they do this thing where in Germany there's a system of they're called the Kommunales Kino, the kind of more community cinemas. They have some sort of deal where they have to show short films, short independent films, and so kind of shows in those for a long time, and shown in those kind of cinemas. And at a certain point, there was a big protest amongst German. Well, I was told anyway. I didn't hear about this directly, but they told me. The Hamburg people told me that some cinemas refused to show the film because they thought it glorified skinheads. No. So it's interesting. I thought it was meant to be a critique, it was seen as being, kind of. So obviously and it was the Projectionist Union kind of had protests about showing this film, which was kind of odd.
When was that?
Well, it was. I think they started showing it. When would it have been? Late 90s, I think. Yeah, I'd made it quite a long time before they started showing it, or maybe it was this century. But it was before the kind of real rise of neo-fascism in America that was, Germany that we're seeing at the moment. So it was like, but it's always been around, I mean, the kind of the skinhead kind of hasn't gone away in Germany like it did in Britain, Whereas in Britain, sometimes I kind of, and some other countries, I sometimes wonder whether the signifiers of the skinhead, a lot of people don't actually get those things. And the thing I found really interesting was the film actually became quite popular, I found, amongst gay men who found the film very erotic. And I had several gay guys who said to me, "Oh, that that's so hot. That makes me feel so horny in that film." And the whole thing of course, like that sort of shaved head look, has became, it could be a gay uniform as well as, at a certain time, as just as much as it previously.
Humour does underline a serious point, as you made, and does amplify it.
Mm-hmm.
But people do say that humour doesn't always travel.
Yeah.
And when you're using signs and signifiers the way you are, you talked about interpretation, misinterpretation. It doesn't necessarily carry the same signifiers to another culture.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Can I go back on what you were saying about your voice and how you've used your voice? And your voice is an ingredient that recurs through your work. If on occasions such as this, where we can watch a number of your films, one after the other, we encounter your voice again and again,
Well, to be honest, I kind of, when I'm putting together a program of films together, I kind of try and I sort of think, oh God, it's another one with my voice. You know, how do I how do I separate them out? You know, so I very consciously, you know, for example, I can't remember what the running order is, but you know, Steve Hates Fish, which doesn't have my voice, you know, is between. Oh, it was chronological. Yeah, that's how it worked out in the end. Yeah. But I feel. On one level, I feel kind of quite uncomfortable about my voice being one film after another, but more because I don't really want people to think, oh God, it's that bloody voice again, you know, rather than, in some ways, I kind of, on one level, I suppose I quite like it because it's actually, again, drawing attention to the illusion of cinema, in that, you know, the voice is taking on a completely different function from one film to another, and one might be quite autobiographical, one might be completely fictitious, you know, so all of those. I mean, I want people to doubt. I mean, that's the really important thing about the work. I think the work, although the work has, some of the work is, you know, completely documentary in a sense. I'm telling the truth in some of there are improbable stories that I tell sometimes, which are absolutely factual. I just tell them in such a way as
Like the story of Dad's Stick, for instance.
yes, yeah.
Which somehow one knows to be true.
No, right. But there are other films which are kind of they're maybe more far-fetched, like I don't know if many people have seen in my Hotel Diaries videos, but they're all completely based on you know, real experience.
Lebanon, was it?
There's one in Israel, Palestine, but they're all shot in hotel rooms in different countries, and I always recount. They all involve some major world event or to do with the conflicts in the Middle East and Afghanistan, to my own kind of mundane experience on that day, staying in that country in that hotel room. And I use the hotel room as a found film set, so I make these kind of metaphorical connections between bits of furniture and you know, the death of Yasser Arafat or whatever, you know, and they're kind of constructed in such a way as that, although everything I'm saying in them is absolutely factual, it's hard to believe because they're constructed backwards. So there are things which appear like coincidence, which of course I've actually orchestrated them around, like, you know, what the picture on the wall in a particular hotel room was, or something like that. So, but that's important to me, to make work which is sort of suspect. You know, that even though a lot of the films are about recounting real events, I don't want them to be completely trusted. I always want there to be an element of doubt there, and that's kind of important. Just because everything that we say and do is subjective, so that, you know, without being too philosophical about it, you know, I don't really particularly believe in objective truth about those things. And
Just somehow you insist on yourself as an unreliable
narrator.
Yeah. So can we talk about the Wasteland? That's a quite singular, distinct kind of film in your oeuvre. Not least because it uses your voice again to explore poetry in a very quite languid kind of way.
Well, that film, a lot of my films have like very long gestation periods, and the Wasteland actually came about, as we see from the images up there, if people haven't seen it, from my realization that T.S. Eliot was an anagram of toilets. But I noticed that in 1969 when I first went to the North East London Polytechnic, and the sign for the toilets was in the corridor, and it was like a perspex sign, actually coming to the sign in the girl chewing gum, which I read as being Greek when it was upside down and back to front. It was a sign that said toilets, and it was printed on a piece of clear plastic or glass, I'm not sure. So you could read it from the other side backwards, and it's almost T.S. Eliot when you read toilets backwards. It's S.T. Eliot, I think, isn't it? Anyway, so I had it in my head for many years, and then my local pub, I used to very often end in a lock-in at very late at night, and I had this idea anyway that I wanted to make. That I wanted to make a work which actually explored the idea of that particular pun, and then I started to think about it, and I thought, oh, I'll use a bit of the Wasteland, because I thought, oh, the Wasteland, that could be a toilet, you know, that's where the where your waste goes, you know, the wasteland could be. And then I just picked up the poem, and I'm a great believer in kind of accident, synchronicity. And I opened the book, I can't remember where, and I'm reading this book about, oh, sweet Thames, you know, the river bears no traces of sandwich papers, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights, and the pub toilet, those filthy toilet with cigarette ends in the toilet, and I thought, and he's talking about the river. He said, by the rivers of Lehman, I sat down and wept. I thought, the rivers of lemon, you know, and that's what is in the male urinal, you know, as we see in one of the images, you know. So, so that was quite extraordinary. And then there's the good night, ladies, and that guy at the beginning says good night, ladies. I don't know if you've noticed, but everybody's leaving the pub. If you look at the clock, it's like 12:30, and some people are starting to leave. And as these women leave the bar by the back entrance onto the street, it used to be called the Door of Shame in this pub, where people who were locked in could actually sneak out. The guy says, oh, good night, ladies. Good night, ladies. And then, of course, when you read the poem, later on it says, good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, toilet. You know, so it was great, all those different connections. But that film was kind of, I have this thing about wanting to do things live, where, you know, so I'm actually speaking the poem while I'm in the pub toilet and filming. So I'm filming and speaking at the same time, as I am in the Hotel Diaries videos. But I went to sort of great lengths with the Wasteland, because you know, the person at the beginning is supposed to be urinating when they're speaking, and you just see the pebble dash, the wall, and then it reveals the space. But I kind of thought, well, I should really be, you know, filming, speaking, and pissing at the same time. But I can't do that. So I got my friend Ian Board, who's another video artist, to come in, and Ian was actually standing next to me with a watering can, pouring water into the trough of the toilet while I'm speaking. And then he had to kind of get out and come back in, because he appears at the end coming in as I go out, and so he's Bill. So good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. And, but it took all this ridiculous orchestration for something which completely could have been done without. And after making that piece, I thought, well, actually, I'm going to speak and talk at the same time. I need to appear in some way. So the Hotel Diaries videos, most of them, I appear in the mirror in the film at some point. You actually see that it is actually a live speech. And in this one, yeah.
Tell me more about this one, because it seems to me that your work is almost as if it's been leading up to the life that we're all now leading, a sort of a COVID restrictive space.
That's my life, you know.
And that, you know, where your films have this insularity about them, almost self-containment, as if, you know, that the world that you are projecting onto us is one of a kind of quarantine, so with Black Tower.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, the narrator in that is restricted to a room, agoraphobically restricted to a room. And you've got kind of like, it's almost like an apogee of your career that you made twice. So can you tell me more about how you made that and how that came about?
That came about just because of this absurd thing of, like, when Boris Johnson sort of said, you know, wash your hands, and for the amount of time it takes to sing Happy Birthday twice. And I thought, why can't you have a song that you only have to sing once, you know? And then, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg said, we could sing the national anthem. You know, but I thought, I'd rather sing Happy Birthday, but it doesn't seem all that appropriate. So I just got it into my head, this kind of mad idea. Because at the time, of course, he was saying, you know, kind of, just wash your hands, sing Happy Birthday twice, and get on with business as usual. You know, most of us, don't worry about it, you know. So I just kind of thought this was just horrific, and by the time I made the film, there were, you know, 25,000 people dead, you know. So I kind of had the idea, really just came out of thinking, okay, I'm going to sing Happy Birthday, but I sing it to the tune of the Death March, rather than the happy birthday tune. And then I thought, well, how am I going to film it? I wanted it to be, you know, because it's during lockdown, I kind of wanted it to appear as though I was, you know, completely on my own, although my partner was in the house with me as well. And, fortunately, she was actually out of shot looking at the screen of the the screen of the iPhone, so because I didn't know where I was looking, I had to kind of guess. So she sort of lined me up on my hands to begin with, and then I go up, and but that was where it came from, and then there were these accidental aspects to it came about, which I quite liked, because in order to get the framing right, to see my face with the iPhone sticking out the top of my head, I had to kind of look up like this, and I'm washing my hands as well, and I thought, and it becomes this kind of ecclesiastical, this kind of biblical image, which was completely by accident. Then I kind of discovered that in rehearsal, and I thought, oh yeah, that really works, you know. So I'm like praying to God, you know, as in this kind of classical, what's the word, whatever pose anyway, of some devout.
Is that one of your faster productions?
Yes, very fast. Yeah, that was done in a few hours. That was good. Yeah, the work kind of varies between things that take 5 years and things that take 5 minutes, you know. But I like to alternate them. Very often the quick ones get made because I'm thinking, God, I haven't made anything for so long.
Do you ever feel under any kind of pressure to be more productive?
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. But I also really don't want to do the same thing twice, although I do sing Happy Birthday. But so I'm sort of a bit more at ease now, because very often I don't make anything for quite a while, you know. I mean, I've been much more productive this year than I have been for a while, you know. I made several pieces this year, but it used to bother me a lot. Now I kind of, one of the nice things about making film is that, you know, I can still show work that I've made 40 years ago. So I have no problem. The problem is always like, how do you pare down the work that you show in a program, not how do you find enough, you know. And people very often say to me, God, you're so prolific. And I say, well, I'm not prolific at all. It's just I've been making work for a long time, and, you know, and I still show a really high percentage of it, you know. So
are there films that just banned? Are there ideas?
Yeah, there are films that I don't show, and I feel a bit of a coward actually that some of the work that I don't show is the kind of more difficult stuff, and the stuff which has less humour in it, and so there are kind of durational, quite, you know, sort of much harder going work than the things I've been showing here that I don't show very often. So there are some films that I really like, which are longer, so I won't show them very often because, you know, basically I don't like to show more than sort of maybe 80 minutes maximum of films in a program, because it gets too much for people after that, too many ideas. But, well, that's 40 minutes. So that I was just about to mention Slow Glass, because that's one of my favourite films that I've made, but I don't show it very often because there's not much room for anything else in the program. It's got a lot of different stuff in it.
Yeah, I wondered if it was the same plot.
It's more than one. No, it's not actually. That's the Northcote. Slow Glass is mainly in the approach in Old Ford Road in Hackney, but some of it's in the Black Lion in Plaistow, which was the local pub when I was teaching in Plaistow.
It's got that really long shot that Hawkins was capturing.
Yeah.
That must have been really hard to do.
It was really lucky actually to do it, but I nearly didn't manage to do it. There's a for those who haven't seen the film, it's like a 10-minute tracking shot along the production line where the glass is being manufactured. So the hot liquid glass is coming out and then being cooling and then going along the conveyor belt, and the process is amazing in the Pilkington factory where they make, you know, most of the glass in the country, because it's all done on one production line, and at the end of the production line it goes along, then the sheets from the liquid glass at one end, at the other end the glass is cut and stacked and goes onto lorries to be shipped out. I mean, it's amazing, incredible process. but from the 60s, early 70s was when the technology was developed. So it looks kind of ancient at the same time, but it's very, very efficient. But it was much easier to film than it looks because they had a crane, a jib that went the whole way along the line. And we got in that film. I was working again with Patrick Duval, who's shot Gargantuan, and he's quite an adventurous guy. And we got in there, and we sort of persuaded them to let us put the camera up on the middle of this jib, and but it was absolutely really, really dangerous because they had no kind of safety barrier or anything. So we were just above the glass, looking straight down, with nothing kind of, so nothing to hold on to. And kept the tripod fixed onto it's balanced really on the top of this jib, and we got just to. Well, it was amazing that we got the permission because actually just at the end somebody came in and said, "What the fuck are those people doing out there? Get them down, for God's sake!" And it was like, and I think probably the person who let us do it got sacked. I don't know, but anyway, fortunately we got away with it. Yeah. No, it was fantastic. But I was really lucky that we managed to get it because it's. It actually went on much longer. In the end, I did cut it at a certain point. I thought I can't actually keep it longer than that. But that was amazing filming in that factory because there are shots in it where you're looking at the flames in the furnace and things like that, and they have these windows that you can look into the furnace and see the gas jets on the molten tin that they float the glass on. And the heat is so intense that we had to make armour for ourselves out of Bako foil. we kind of covered ourselves in Bako foil to reflect the heat, and fortunately the camera lens didn't melt, but it was so amazing heat. So the health and safety aspect of filming in Pilkington was rather neglected, I have to say. I mean, nowadays it just wouldn't be possible. It just would not be possible at all.
That thing in your films where there are these kind of single takes where everything is really happening real time, and then these really tricky shots like in the Black Tower where the tree becomes a interface between two completely different times, or in Slow Glass the wind at the rearview mirror is not showing what is actually behind the car. So you kind of like that really completely different sense of imagine what film is. Right next to each other. It's really exciting. And not many people do.
Right. No, I like it. It has its downside as well, though, because in the Black Tower there are those tricks like the cars. Very often people see the Black Tower in a way is a follow-on from the ideas of The Girl Chewing Gum, to do with the fact that through the use of language you can persuade people that something other than it really is. So hopefully it's clear to most people that I'm just filming the tower from different angles, and it's exactly the same building filmed from different angles, and I'm telling stories which imply it's in a different place. But so because I could see it from the grounds of a hospital, I thought, okay, sickness is going to be a theme, and I could see it across a graveyard. That okay, this person's got to die. Oh, I can see it over a high wall. Therefore, maybe that could be a prison wall. So the narrative's written around those things. And but very often people see the film and they think that, especially now, that it's a special effect, that I've actually superimposed this building on different landscapes, and it's a perfectly legitimate, now. I mean, I think when I first made it, it would have been impossible to do that as convincingly. But now you could, so it's perfectly legitimate reading. So that's the kind of downside of the fact that there is actual trickery.
And practice for your work.
No,
You
yeah.
simply wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
Nothing. But I finished about 2 weeks ago. I finished. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. I am sort of working on something. I'm not sure whether it will end up being something that ends up as a complete piece, but I've made a follow-up to Twice, which actually talks about the thing of singing Happy Birthday twice while washing your hands as being like a spell to exorcise the devil spirit of COVID. So I made a follow-up, or in the middle of making a follow-up, called Magic, which says, you know, that the spell wasn't strong enough, and so the government had to come up with, you know, something else which might work to defeat the virus. So the government consulted the chief magical officer, and after Boris Johnson's spell in hospital, and came up with a new mantra. And so I've taken a piece of video where, I don't know if people saw that really bizarre. I think it was in June when he made a speech to the nation about, oh no, actually, I think it was just a press conference about relaxing lockdown, and he made this sort of stumble about contact tracing, and he kept stumbling over his word, and he said contract tasting, testing, tracing, and he kept saying contract, and then I said all these contracts they've awarded to their friends. You know, I thought this is some Freudian slip, but anyway, I didn't particularly go into that, but I've looped that bit of footage, so he just keeps going contract, and then in the end they say, well, it didn't work because he didn't really believe in the new spell, and he was too lazy to learn the words properly, and 2 hours. No, actually, it's a bit complicated. But anyway, so that doesn't work. But then the end of it, I thought I'd finished it a few weeks ago, and at that time the figures of the deaths from COVID were announced as being 45,000. And this was early August. And if you remember, I think it was on the 12th of August, the government decided they were going to change the way in which they counted deaths. So they, up until that point, the deaths in England were counted by anybody who died who'd been diagnosed with the virus. Whereas now they're counted as anybody who dies within 28 days of being diagnosed with the virus. So if you die after 29 days, you're not a statistic, because obviously they were very anxious about getting the numbers down, because we were winning the whole of Europe. We were right up the top there, and so anyway, this video now ends with saying they did make, in the end they did find the magic did work, and they found a way of bringing people back from the dead. Yeah. That's because the original credit says 45,000 dead, and then the new credit says 41,000 or 57,000, depending on how you want to count it. But anyway, I've described that. You don't need to see that.
I don't think that's the case.
You seem to embrace technology really well in your work. Would you ever go back to using film, or have you gone back to using film recently?
I haven't done, and for a long time I thought I never would, but kind of perversely, it's appealing to me more and more to actually make something on film again. I think perversely because it's more and more, it's harder and harder to actually do it. But and I still have all my camera equipment and things like that. I think I might make something again on film before, while it's still possible to get it processed. But I had a bit of a reaction against film for quite a few years, mainly to do with the way in which I felt that film was being fetishized in the art world, and I thought that, for me, I felt that a lot of that came out of these ideas of commodifying a medium, and obviously film is not infinitely reproducible like digital material is. So there's obviously attraction to the commercial art world to kind of push the film as a similar medium to print, and artificially increase commodity value in that way. But I sort of I don't feel like that anymore. But I was, or not as much as I did. But for a while, I was rather irritated by the fact that whenever I went to an exhibition, there was like a 16mm looper machine in the gallery, and very often I'd look at what was being shown on the screen and think, well, there's not really any reason why this should be shown on this medium, and it seems sort of slightly obscene to me because, as we know, film prints wear out, and you know, so you're actually destroying something kind of unnecessarily. You know, after if you've got an exhibition that's running for several months, you're probably going to want 6 prints of the film, which are just going to be destroyed, which I think is fine if the work is very medium specific. But very often you see work where you think, well, why was this shot on film rather than shot on a free medium, and also because people, although they're nice things to look at, are very aware of the kind of fetishization of the technology and how people would sort of very often see a film showing on a loop in a gallery and maybe be more interested in looking at the film going through the machine than what's actually being projected in there. So I think I was a bit outspoken about that for a while. It upset quite a few people.
So what attracts you to go back to it? I mean, is it just you've got all this equipment, you might as well use it? Or? No,
I like I think it's interesting the quality. But I for a while I didn't particularly. I mean, when high definition video came along, I was really excited by the fact that I could get much more detail into an image than I'd ever been able to on 16mm film. Because I always would have liked to have made something on 35mm, but there was no. It was always a very expensive medium to work with, and so I never did. So when HD came along, I thought, oh yeah, this is really exciting. But I'm really interested in how one's attitude to these changes in media changes over time. So I mean, now when I look at this kind of constant evolution of HD, 4K, this concentration on actually seeing things in sharper and sharper detail and things like that. In some ways, there's something sort of slightly sickening about that. I don't know. I'm having a kind of reaction against something which initially I found very exciting. And it made me think a while ago, I was thinking about, when I first started working on film, some artists were working with video, mainly people who were kind of more interested in performance work and things like that. But those two media were so different that for me, if you were interested in the aesthetics of an image, there's no way that you would work on video because people were working, at that point on a black and white reel-to-reel video recorder that the definition was so poor that you could you certainly couldn't look at a page of text and be able to read all the words. You'd have to zoom in on very closely. But so I hated the aesthetics of video. But now when I look at those videos that people made of performance at that time, I find them completely magical. Very often, largely because I have to imagine part of what's going on in the scene, because I'm thinking, is that a shoebox on the table or is it a pile of books? I don't know. The image is so blurry, and that's a magical thing. Yeah, and a lot of yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, there are a lot of people know Kevin Atherton's work, and he made some really interesting video performance pieces, and which certainly looking at them again now. And also Ian Bourne, I was mentioning, made a lot of monologue, talking to camera pieces, and but they had a kind of mystery which we have lost in the world of high definition. Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you all very, very much.
Great.